Hello, everyone. This is Chaco, and today I'm very glad to welcome Jon Eden Khan with us. So, Jon Eden Khan is a transformational leader, mentor, and facilitator based in Berlin, Germany. He has singularly dedicated his life to supporting humanity to remember the majesty and dignity of who we truly are and building a culture of unity based on that recognition that we can pass on to future generations. John's work includes projects that are focused on the following areas: new governance and politics, collective awakening, mentoring, soul driven leaders. He works in these areas because they are what move him, inspire him, and turns his soul on most deeply about what it means to be human. I'm very, very glad and very happy to share with you some moment with Jon today. Going deep into the Trans Himalayan teaching, this is the direction this whole video podcast is going to take, and then let it emerge what is there to be emerged in this conversation. So, welcome, Jon.
Thank you, Chaco. Good to be with you.
Yeah, I'm happy. Thanks for your time. So, let's dive in directly. So, can you talk about? I've been following your work for some time, some years, and inspired by your work and the way you bring it in different ways, and especially how you narrate the storyline about human evolution. So, what I've understood by reading, by listening to you, is you have been influenced and you're following what we call the Trans Himalayan Teachings. Can you go a bit deeper, explain? Where does it come from? What are these teachings, and how can we understand these teachings further?
Sure thing. Yeah, I can do my best to describe that and unpack that. So, the Trans Himalayan tradition is a name given to a body of teachings which began around the late 1800s, around 1870, 1875, were initiated by a woman called Helena Blavatsky. Some people will have heard of Helena Blavatsky, and she initiated the Theosophical movement, and then was later carried on by a woman called Alice Bailey. I feel like people like Rudolf Steiner as well were definite contributors to this movement in the broadest sense. Helena Roerich, Lucille Cederkranz, and then more recently, one of my teachers, Bruce Lyon, who's also brought through a whole body of teachings. So yeah, these teachings are deeply dedicated to the integration of some of the deep principles of global traditions through time, also within an evolutionary context that understands that we're living at a really incredible time, and that that we're living in a time of global initiation, and that we're living in a time where there's a significant shift which is happening, where the fundamental underpinnings, the foundations of our civilization are going through a radical shift. And are going through a radical shift from a culture that is based on separation and hyper-individualism and humanity operating through quite tribal senses of schism and disconnection from each other, through to a global soul-based culture where there's a recognition that humanity is one, and that the earth is a living being, and that we're part of something extraordinary that has a cosmic dimension to it. And that we are on an evolutionary journey of awakening to who we truly are and learning to embody that individually and collectively. So the Trans Himalayan teachings in their various different stages, there's been different stages of these teachings that have emerged since, as I said, around 1870, 1875. I mean, it's fascinating to talk about each of those stages. They all have their fun, powerful stories, you know. But yeah, they are confronting in a certain way as well. They invite us to consider ideas that are very much beyond our normal conventional way of understanding ourselves and understanding life and understanding our potential. You know, they claim these teachings to be from a community of liberated beings, Buddhas and bodhisattvas, masters, sages, saints, who have moved into phases of the full completion of the human journey and awakening and enlightenment and living from that place, and who have taken their place within a community of liberated beings that support the evolution and awakening of humanity from behind the scenes. And as fantastical as that sounds, perhaps, actually every spiritual tradition has a version of that. Every spiritual tradition has some version of the story that there always has been a group of liberated beings who operate behind the scenes on this planet, supporting our collective awakening and evolution from the background, whether that's the Buddhas and bodhisattvas of Buddhism, whether it's the hidden righteous ones of the Kabbalah, whether it's the spirits of just men made perfect in the Bible, in the section of Revelations, whether it's the immortals of the Taoists, whether it's the Siddha Ashrama of Hinduism. You know, there's every tradition basically has some idea that, I mean, the Sufis, as well as I understand it, have always had this teaching that there's like 72 liberated beings who always dwell on earth, supporting evolution and awakening from behind the scenes. So the Trans Himalayan teachings invite us to understand that those beings have actually entered a different kingdom of nature in a certain way, just as, you know, we have the mineral kingdom and the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom and the human kingdom. The understanding is that the path doesn't stop there, that actually life goes on in its expansions and initiatory openings. And yeah, that each of us has the potential and ultimately will move into stages of development that conventional humanity today doesn't have any idea even exist. So for me, I've always, you know, I spent decades of my life exploring what felt like the most powerful transformational traditions and practices on the planet, including the Trans Himalayan teachings and multiple other traditions and teachings. And the Trans Himalayan teachings are some of the most sophisticated and profound and complex that I've ever come into contact with about the multidimensional evolutionary journey that we're a part of. But really, at the core of those teachings and at the core of how they've most deeply touched me, it's about awe. Really, I have felt awed, and I have felt the profound majesty and beauty of this life and what we're a part of. That's, you know, for me, the real essence, is they invite us to recognize that we are part of something extraordinary, wild, fierce, divine, profound. Yeah, and so that's a little intro
Yeah,
point.
thanks
Yeah.
for that. So, what would be the reason why they name it the Trans Himalayan Teachings? Is there any specific reference to a geographical space, or is just something just came out of nowhere?
Yeah, the word Trans-Himalayan comes from, it was Helena Blavatsky that first used that term. And she did so because, so her role in being an initiator of this tradition was that, I mean, she was just an extraordinary woman who's just an amazing story to tell her story. She was a Russian woman who was arranged to be married at the age of 18. And so she was married to this older guy who was some kind of duke or something like this, some kind of Russian nobility. And very quickly, she felt, this is not for me, you know? And concurrently with that, she was having this strong inner experience where it was like she was being called to the Himalayas, and something in her heard the voice of some voice that she knew, some deep voice that she knew, but that her earthly self, as it were, did not know yet. some voice her soul knew that was calling her to the Himalayas. And she, after, I think it was after 6 months or so of her arranged marriage, she was like, yeah, I'm done. And she just left. And which at the time, you've got to imagine this would have been 18, I don't remember the exact date, but it would have been in the, 18, who knows, 1870 or so. It was a big deal for a very young woman like that to basically just leave this arranged marriage to Russian nobility and say, I'm going to the Himalayas, and
Yeah.
that's what's happening. And she went to the Himalayas. She tried to penetrate the Himalayas 3 times following the compass of this voice. She failed twice. The third time she made it. And she claimed that she came into contact with a a subsection of this wider community of liberated beings, that there was a group of beings that she came into contact with, a group of liberated beings who dwelled in the Himalayas. So, in the Hindu tradition, this idea of Siddha Ashrama, they have an understanding that there is a group of siddhas or liberated beings who dwell in the Himalayas, the Buddhists also. And yeah, so she claimed that she actually came into contact with such a group of beings, and she spent 3 years there being trained by them and supported to say yes to the purpose that was hers to go and serve in the world. So Trans Himalayan comes from the fact that this body of teachings was first said to come from this group of liberated beings dwelling in the Himalayas.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So, how did you got introduced into these teachings, and how it influenced your life? As of now, how
Yeah.
are you living through that teachings?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 42 now. I came into contact with these teachings when I was, I think about 22, but I first started to come into contact with them, though I didn't really know I was coming into contact with them when I was about 19. I had a friend who had this crazy capacity to go into charity shops in the UK and just find these insanely amazing, profound, rare spiritual books. And, he just had this knack. He would just go into shops and be like, hey, look what I found, And so he found some theosophical books when we were about 19. And I remember then just being like, what is this? I started reading books about Zen and Tibetan Buddhism when I was 9 years old. So I had always had this really strong calling to transformational spirituality, like learning a lot about transformational spirituality. In my teen years, I then had read a lot around Buddhism. I got really into the Western esoteric tradition. And then in my later teen years, read a lot about shamanism and got really into kind of exploring shamanism. And then we started to come into contact with this material when I was about 19. And then I was homeless. I was I went through a kind of dark night of the soul, really, between the ages of 19 and 24, where I was a homeless heroin addict. And during that time, when I was about 20, a few years in, when I was about 21, 22, I came into contact with a man who was kind of like a father to some of us heroin addicts, basically. And he was an extraordinary man. He was a man who I developed a very deep bond with, and he was older than us. And he was a man who'd been in prison twice for armed robbery. He was known by police to be a dangerous individual. I only ever experienced incredible love from this man, just an incredibly powerfully loving human. He was a very damaged man. His mother had killed herself when he was a child. He'd never really developed a strong relationship with his father. And he was so intelligent. He was one of those people whose level of intelligence was so high that it actually had been a serious social problem for him in his life, because there were so few people that he could really relate to. And he was also the greatest artist I've ever met. He drew these incredible images and painted these incredible images of Egyptian goddesses. And he had this incredible spiritual library. And short story is that came into contact with these teachings through some of his books, where I just saw some of these books and I had no idea what they were, but something clicked in me, something new. I need to find out what that is. And yeah, and I did. I got some of those books, some of the Alice Bailey books, and it was, yeah, a fundamental turning point in my life. I knew these teachings, I knew this teacher, but I didn't know these teachings, and I didn't know this teacher. And I felt so touched by the purity of these teachings. They're so deeply dedicated towards service. They're so deeply dedicated towards people waking up to who they truly are, and then finding their place to serve more love happening in our world, and more sacred purpose and more sacred embodiment as part of something extraordinary that we're all part of. And the purity and the integrity of these teachings struck me deeply. And yeah, and I spent the next years just consuming them completely, and really entering into working with them.
Yeah, thanks for that. So if I ask you this personal question, are you still in touch with this man, or is he still alive, or he
He
left the
died.
body?
No, he
Okay.
died. He died, maybe, wait, so that would have all been, it's over 20 years ago. I think he must have died around 12 years ago or so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still feel him with me. He's still with me. I have some part of me is like, I think he was a teacher of mine in some previous life. He was an incredible being who had a very, very hard journey. And I have one side of me which is like, yeah, he's an example that not all great souls make it. And I have another side of me which thinks, well, maybe he was exactly where he needed to be. He was a lighthouse for some of us who are in very dark places, and a powerful lighthouse. So yeah, he remains a powerful mystery to me, and someone I will love forever. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, John, for sharing that touching story about you. So further going deeper into this, I've been following Bruce Lyon, and he has been kind of my teacher into this teachings. So he talks about like embodiment of soul and also the monad. So I would like to know, like from your perspective, why as human beings do we need to embody more soul at this point of time in human evolution? Is it something that is available to everyone, or is it something that you have to make a choice at one point? You need to like, okay, now I need to call my soul in. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so if we first start with acknowledging that our society has interwoven strongly into it a fundamental rejection of soul. So most humans are not supported to freely remember and connect to the love that they truly are, and who they are as a being of essential love, innocence, and consciousness, and learn to live that in the world. That is not how most humans are brought up. Most humans are brought up with expectations, demands, projections, and requirements for them to be something. When I was growing up, it was very clear that there was a strong expectation for me to work out as fast as my parents hoped could happen, basically how I was going to fit into the economic machine in a way which wasn't going to be a problem to them in some way. And bless them, they did their best, but it was not like, hey, who are you? Who are you as a soul? Let's help you find out what you're here for, and welcome you to take your place as part of the collective human tribe. So because of that, because we have vast systemic conditioning and actually vast collective trauma about not being welcomed as souls, to the degree to which that any of us have not been welcomed as who we truly are, that is traumatic, whether we've discovered that or not. At some point we will, if we haven't yet, we will recognize that there was, the more that we wake up to who we truly are as a soul, the more we'll recognize that how much that wasn't the case, and the pain of that. And yeah, so then that sets up the path, and the path then involves people going on a journey of remembering who they are as a soul. And very often that happens through breakthrough conscious experiences, whether it's a medicine ceremony, whether it's some peak experience in meditation or prayer or a walk at night under the stars, whatever it is, some event or retreat. We start to wake up in our consciousness to who we are at a deeper level, and it's revelatory and profound, and we feel taken into wanting to walk a path that involves us actually living in integrity with that and in alignment with that more and more fully. Now, for that to actually be real, that to actually be true all the way through, it must be embodied, because otherwise there's going to be a fundamental schism and split within me or within you between the parts of me that are opening to a felt sense of, oh, I think actually I'm part of a sacred universe, and actually I'm a being who is at the level of my soul deeply interconnected with that sacredness and part of an interconnected field of love and intelligence and grace. But in my embodied life, I'm super tight and contracted in my emotions, and I'm deeply scared about how my relationship life is going to go this way or that way, and I'm living in massive financial survival fear and doing a job that doesn't feel in integrity or alignment with who I feel I am on a soul level, and that's just painful, and it's confronting, and it's scary for us to try and take the path to change those things so that not just my mind can align and feel the truth of who I am in my meditation session or whatever, when I'm out with friends in the forest or whatever, but that's how I'm navigating difficult emotional situations. That's how I'm navigating uncomfortable conversations with people that I'm close to, or just people in the world. That's how I'm navigating my sexual relationships. That's how I'm navigating my relationship with money. That's how I'm navigating where on the earth I choose to be and have my home and perhaps have a family, how I choose to raise my children, or all of that is embodiment. All of that is, how does it actually get lived in the embodied realm, and is that in alignment? And I think that is a necessity. Right? I think it's, if we're really serious about taking this path all the way, then it is a necessity for us to embody in alignment and integrity the truth that we are finding ourselves to be on levels of our heart and our consciousness. Otherwise, there's just going to be fundamental splits in our being.
Okay, so if I understand, if I get it correctly, like embodying soul is also embodying it in your day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, some people got stuck, for example, for some reason, maybe they have taken a loan and they have to do this particular job, and they got an opening and say, okay, this is not what I want to do. What would you suggest? Like, should you listen to the soul calling, or should you do a transition? What would be the, I know that there is no ideal situation. It can be very, very individual journeys, but what would be your kind of, suggestion, if you have any?
Yeah, if I understood you in terms of the example that you just shared of someone who took out a loan and then
Yeah.
so get out of debt as fast as possible. That's definitely one thing, because that's just something that keeps us extra levels of locked into the kind of present system as it is. Just get out of debt as soon as possible, and be willing to take risks. Be willing to take the risk of saying yes to those choices in life that are aligned, that feel aligned with our soul. And there's different ways to do that in my experience. Sometimes the right way to do it is to take a big jump and to draw a clear line in our life and say, to take a big risk and say, well, I'm actually just going to quit my job, and I'm going to quit my job, and I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to trust, and I'm going to find something else, and I'm going to develop something else. I'm going to say yes to putting myself in that position of pressure to ignite more of the creativity of my soul, to find a way, and I will find my way. you know.
Mm.
Sometimes that's the right answer. Sometimes the right answer is, well, I can feel like I can feel the direction I'm called to move in, and I want to do that more, but right now it doesn't feel like that's going to pay my bills. So I'm going to reduce my hours if I can, or I'm going to create a little bit more space in my life whilst I continue doing the work that I'm doing that pays my bills. I'm going to somehow create a bit more space that I'm going to dedicate to taking step by step a pathway forward into living and exploring and creating options for me to live more deeply from alignment with my soul. And I'm going to give more and more energy to that over time and do the transition step by step.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the right answer, you know. And
Mm.
I want to acknowledge that the whole context of what we're talking about here involves certain levels of privilege. You know, there's a lot of people in the world who do not have the privilege to be able to make choices like this. You know, there's a lot of people in the world who are trapped in situations of such poverty or challenging financial realities that it would be very difficult for them to make such choices. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. There's a huge dimension of privilege here. And the other side of that is there's nothing that can defeat the human spirit. You know, that actually there are people in all kinds of circumstances of a lack of privilege and very challenging circumstances who break through into whole new phases of being because something in them knows that they must. You know, for me, this all happened for me when I was homeless. I basically had nothing and no one, you know, and except for some people around me, but and also other side of that, I'm a white guy in a reasonably well-developed country, you know, when that was all going on, and we're a very well-developed country, and that and with certain social services that are available to me and so on, and so levels of privilege. So, but yeah, what I would say is that the challenge here is that when people are facing making those kinds of choices, the fear that can come up is, well, that feels crazy because what's going to catch me if I jump? And from one angle, staying plugged into the present system where we trade our time for money in the kind of in that whole thing can seem safer. And the other side of it is when you jump and you give yourself to living from alignment with your soul, you learn that you actually plug yourself into a deeper source of safety, because you then choose to align yourself not just with your own soul, but with your soul's connection to an interconnected field of intelligence and support that allows you much greater capacity to meet the people you're meant to meet, to connect to the opportunities you're meant to connect to open up your worldview, to be aware of possibilities that you just never would have been previously. And so when someone is making that choice and making that jump, very often there'll be people around them and voices in their own head saying, that is crazy. Why would you do that? You know, this is like, don't take this woo-woo crazy option that's going to go nowhere. And that's understandable because those people don't know that there is another way to live that's actually plugged into another kind of safety. It's not the safety of here's your contract that's going to show you what your employment and salary is going to be in 8 months from now. It's not that, it's not those kinds of securities, but it is a safety that will hold you in a way that has a certain mystery to it, but involves such a deeper level of fulfillment and satisfaction and a sense of alignment with life and opportunity to grow and expand and to serve and find our place in a much more fulfilling way. So the only people who really know that as true are the people who've done it. And people who've done it then realize, oh, something caught me. And if something didn't catch them, then there's lessons there, you know, and life is full of lessons with every possible thing we do. So yeah, those are some thoughts on how people navigate that moment in their journey.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's really good, like very deep into how you find your own path. And you can either jump or you can actually make some transition, and then at one point
Yeah.
let go of everything.
Yeah.
And trying to live through that, unplugging from the system, but at the same time plugging to something much deeper, that you said. Yeah, it's very interesting, as you said. And
Yeah.
at the same time, and if you look at from a collective humanity's point of view, are we at this point where we are going to be pushed or forced to take a stand or take a jump? Are we reaching that point from
Yeah,
perspective? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think we are. I think part of the nature of our time is it's almost like the Earth's alarm clock is ringing and saying, "Okay, time's up." The time
Okay.
for time's up for everyone to just go at their own individual pace and work out their own individual path. And I could try and take that risky choice of aligning more deeply with my soul now, but actually maybe I'll come back to that in a couple of years, or stuff like that. No, I think the time is actually up now, and I think that is manifested in the global crisis that we have entered into. It's manifested in the emergence of global scale interconnected crises that are demanding the emergence of radically different kinds of humans and a radically different kind of humanity. And I think this is a evolutionary crisis, and those who have faced evolutionary crises in their past know what an evolutionary crisis feels like. And I think there's one way of viewing that ancient Chinese kind of saying or proverb thing of, right, every crisis is an opportunity. And I think when we learn to look at life through the eyes of the soul, we learn to see the intelligence that plays out through the most beautiful and also the most challenging dimensions of our journeys. And yeah, when we've, for me, I know that once I had crises arise in my life that required me to face some of the most challenging, contracted, traumatized, painful parts of me, and somehow resolve my self-loss and self-abandonment in those places and bring myself home in ways that I never knew how to previously. Once I'd been through that journey a couple of times, I'd done a couple of those cycles, then I was like, oh, okay, I kind of think I get how this works. I get that this is part of life. And actually, each time you go through that and you come out the other side, you realize that, oh my God, I've uncovered gold here. I'm so much more of a more whole human being who has found the intelligence and the purpose and the beauty that lay in the parts of me that I was actually previously most frightened and ashamed of. And yeah, but of course, until you've gone through that wormhole, a couple of times, you're terrified of it, and life takes you through it kicking and screaming. So I feel like that's kind of where we are collectively, that there's such a accumulation of fuckery, basically,
Yeah.
accumulation of injustice, and an accumulation of collective trauma, and an accumulation of just the horrendous ways that we've treated each other and treated the earth and treated ourselves, that it's reached a boiling point. And that boiling point is a time of initiatory change, I feel, and it is demanding the emergence of a global humanity that can live in right relationship with itself and with each other and with the earth. That is the only answer to the current crisis that exists and is building, from the pandemic through to global economic instability, through to the wars that are being fought at the moment, through to the innocents that are dying, through to the fact that every month on record for the last 12 months has been the hottest ever recorded. There's and the list goes on. The only answer to this is where life is asking us to go. And within that context, yeah, I don't think everyone does just have whatever time they need anymore. I think there's a wider context that's come online and said, okay, it's time, and that is felt in the pressure that so many people feel within them and outside of them. For something has to shift here. Something needs to move. Something's got to give for some kind of transformation to happen. Yeah.
So basically, there is no more choice. I mean, it's happening, and as humanity, as a collective being, will be forced, or we are pushed towards that. So I have heard, I think it's Bruce or you talking about the initiation of Earth as a being. So it's like Earth is being initiated into a rite of passage, and like we are living on Earth, all the beings, all the living organisms, whether we like it or not, we are going to be like taken through that, right?
Yeah, I still think there is a certain level of choice. I think
Okay.
that there is I don't think anyone's just going to pop into some enlightened state of being without, just against their will. I don't think it's going to happen that way. I think there's a collective momentum, like there's a collective pressure. Life is trying to have something happen, and we can turn away for sure, but if we do, the crisis is going to hurt a lot more. And yeah, I know that from my own individual life and from what I've witnessed in others. Sometimes life brings us crises that some part of us can feel the potential of what can maybe shift in my life if I respond in this way. I could choose to open. I could choose to take the risk of saying a deeper yes to what feels true for me. Who knows what I'll lose if I do that? Maybe I'll lose friends. Maybe a relationship has to go. Maybe I have to quit this job. Maybe I'm going to risk upsetting my parents or the people that I care about, what they think about me. Maybe not, but we can feel that risky edge of expansion. And there's also another option, and the other option is keep ticking along, just like I'm going to close my eyes to that, tell myself the story that I'm going to come back to that in a couple of years or whatever. Keep doing my thing, tell myself the story that this was the right thing to do and anything else would have been too risky, whatever the story that we tell ourselves, right? And when we do that, maybe life tolerates that for a while, but at some point it's going to hurt, because that's how life works. Life works through beauty and love, and it also works through pain. And pain is a compassionate message from life that we might want to consider reorienting, and trying to listen in to what else life might want to do with us. So that's the case on an individual level. I think it's also the case on a collective level. This is a wild example, but Chaco, I've been reading articles about how polio is starting to exist in Gaza now again. And that's an example of this for me. It's like when stuff gets to that level of this is wrong and this is out of alignment, and we are creating terrible circumstances with greater and greater levels of pain, disconnection, and intensity, disease arises, and whether it's disease within us, between us, it's yeah. And that's not to, I'm not picking a side there in that conflict. I'm just using that as an example of like, that's how life works. When shit is really, really out of alignment and we are making choice after choice after choice after choice that is not aligned with the sacred intelligence of life, it's going to take us into bad places that hurt and that involve death, premature death, disease, sickness, decay, emotionally, physically. This is how life works, and we can choose that. We can choose that, and we all have a choice in how much pain we need to go through before we do the vulnerable thing of choosing to reorient. I know for myself, I've been very stubborn at certain points in my journey. I find that that's a funny thing to think about for me, because it's like, I'm a very, very apparently dedicated person to my growth and my development. And yet still, Jaco, there have been times in my journey where if I look back on it, I'm like, wow, I seemed to really need that to really, really hurt that part of my life before I was willing to say, okay, I'm
Mm.
willing to put everything on the table. I'm willing to let go of my patterns here. I'm willing to do whatever needs to happen for me to shift some of these pieces in myself. Could I have made that choice earlier? Yes, I totally could have done. Why didn't I? Because something in me wasn't ready, and something needed to hurt that much for me to be like, okay. And those have been some of the biggest breakthrough points in my life. So I think that's part of how it works. And collectively, yeah, it's said that in these teachings that there's multiple scales of an initiatory process that's happening right now. And initiation in this context means a time where there's a fundamental shift, where where essentially there's enough crisis that we make an irreversible choice at a certain point, to choose to give ourselves and align with some deeper part of us. And that choice is so total that what has previously been a peak experience, and it's not just that choice is so total, but we've done our work. We've done our work along the way there, that we can step into and onto a new foundation for where we can live from, so that that which has previously been a peak experience becomes the foundation for further stages of growth. And so it's said that this is a time where so many of us are going through that process individually, that humanity is going through that process, that we are being forced increasingly to make choices that are hugely consequential for our place and the health of our collective species on this planet. And at Earth, that's where one of the beautiful things about the Trans Himalayan Teachings is that they are profoundly cosmic as well. And they tell us that the Earth as a being that is living and conscious through all kingdoms of
Mm.
nature, natural kingdoms, human and superhuman kingdoms, and so on, is itself going through an initiation and a waking up. And that's actually part of a greater cosmic context, where there's the being of our solar system that is going through an initiation, and the being of our galaxy is going through an initiation. And this whole interlocking, profoundly complex and detailed and sophisticated body of teachings about, essentially, that's really at the heart of the Trans Himalayan Teachings. I've come to feel this is why I run Avatara with some other people. That
Mm.
one of my projects is dedicated to exactly this. That it's said that really at one of the core mysteries and transmissions that everything else is built around in the Trans Himalayan Teachings is that one of the greatest significances of our time, behind all of this global crisis and behind all of this, like, are we going to be okay and treat each other well, behind all of that is that the significance of our time is there's a seed of humanity waking up as an expression of the universal life itself. There's a seed of us starting to wake up to, like, oh, wait a minute, what if the formation of this galaxy that we're a part of, and the ignition of nuclear fusion in the hearts of suns, and the coalescing of the cosmic evolutionary process in dense rocky planets like the Earth, and the bursting of life through the evolutionary process from, somehow out of rocks into simple life and complex life, and then, all the way through into us having this conversation on Zoom right now, and like, what
Mm.
if all of that is actually one process of the universe itself starting to wake up through this thing that it's created, humanity, to become conscious of itself? So, and then what happens then? What happens then if we actually start to wake up that we are one thing. We are one emanation of cosmic life that's here actually for a purpose that we've not even begun to imagine because we've been so preoccupied with our own stuff.
So imagine if that is the awakening of humanity into this cosmic galactic being of understanding of, okay, we are just not individuals running around trying to fix the problems in day-to-day life, but it's beyond something else coming through us. Is there any some kind of trigger points like coming from outside triggering the whole chain reaction, or is it something that is going to emerge out of, as you said, because of intense pressure?
I think it's both. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's both. I think actually there are we are self-responsible. Our choices matter. And the choices I make for the rest of my day today matter. The choices I make for the rest of this year and for my life matter. Same for you. The choices we make collectively as humanity about how we respond to the greatest issues of our time matter. And I think we are part of something so much greater, and there are forces starting to move at this time which are way beyond us. I feel like we are on the verge of beginning to recognize what we are a part of, just in terms of this earth, that earth itself is an extraordinary living being that is here for a purpose. It's not just, I'm not just here with a certain purpose, or you or humanity, but earth has a purpose. Earth is a being that is a single, indivisible and sacred life that is a cosmic adventurer in a certain way, here for its own purpose, and humanity is here to be part of that, and on greater and greater scales as well. We are part of a living cosmos of extraordinary scales of being that we are a tiny, tiny part of, and yet simultaneously a very significant part of. And those forces are happening, regardless. Like that's part of the Shambhala impact, idea, that there's a transmission of power that is coming in 2025, that is part of the being of the earth, bringing its being into greater alignment. That I don't have any choice about whether the Shambhala impact comes. You don't have any choice. It's just part of the earth being, establishing its right alignment within its body and its system, that we're going to be impacted by on energetic levels. So yeah.
So just before going into the Shambhala impact, which I'm very curious about, just coming back a bit behind when you talked about the earth as a being in these teachings, considered as a being having its own cosmic adventure, its own cosmic purpose. So I was thinking, okay, then what is my purpose in that whole purpose thing about earth purpose, and does it have any relevance, because I'm just a very, very small, tiny being compared to the earth as a being. So where does my purpose suits in or fits into this whole cosmic, let's say I call it a cosmic joke, what is happening. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, my take, I mean, it's easy when we have conversations like this to start to think, oh my God, if we're talking about such incredibly vast scales of being, what does my life matter? And my experience is that that's just how incredibly loving life is, that actually there is a love that makes the tiniest thing matter profoundly, just as much, that the first gaze of a person into the eyes of a baby who's born in some place I've never heard of, just how someone walking in a forest right now chooses to open themselves to the glory of nature and feel themselves as part of something that they've never been able to before. That matters so beautifully and profoundly, just as much as the awakening of Earth on its cosmic adventure and so on. It's like there's a field of meaning that actually pervades everything if we choose to participate in it, and the love that pervades that field of meaning is present through everything. And I find that an incredible part of life.
Very touching words. Thank you, John, for that. I'll start with Shambhala impact. We are reaching the 1 hour mark.
I will have to jump off, Chaco, because
what we can do is we can do the whole Shambhala thing in another episode. in the coming months, because that would be another completely new, we are opening a new door and we're going in deeper. So it would be very, frustrating for me, and even maybe for you, to just, start something and then not letting it out completely.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I'd love to dive into that with you.
Yeah, so I would like to bring all these different perspectives and what's going on around the world with all this geopolitical development, economics, and even cryptocurrencies, and how it ties into this Shambhala back and bringing back humanity into different layers. So one last question. I've heard a lot of people talking about, like, in a very, very short way, you can say it, talking about like, oh, Earth is moving from the 3D to the 5D, this whole, lots of people talking about this, 3 dimension, the fifth dimension. What's your take on that? And from the Trans Himalayan perspective, is there anything like that that's going to happen?
I mean, I don't use that language, but I do think, here's the way I interpret that. I do think that part of the shift that's happening right now is a collective soul awakening. I think we're on the verge of that. We're not there yet, but I think we're on the verge of it. And I think that's one way to talk about that, is this 3D to 5D thing, is that there are extra frequencies of who we are that we're going to be including in our general perception of the world. I think we're still going to be 3D beings living in a 3D world, but we're also going to have access to this deeper context of who we are as souls. And some people, even maybe if we use that language, 7D, they're also going to have access to who we are as monads. Or, there are deeper layers. There's a healing happening, I feel, in the split. Most of the kind of 3D humans living in the 3D world are fundamentally disconnected and split off in their conscious experience, not in reality, but in their conscious experience, from the deeper planes and realms and realities of what we truly are and the reality of the sacred. And I feel like what's happening right now is a healing of that split in more and more of us, so that we're able to remember who we are there, and we're also able to be here, and we're able to align our life with those deeper frequencies, and open also to the transmission of the glory and beauty and majesty and divinity of the earth and of our bodies and of matter, to flow in and nourish these more subtle frequencies of who we are as souls. So I feel like that's a way I understand that. It's an opening up of more frequencies of the sacredness that's here, healing of the disconnection, and more availability for us to really live the truth of who we are.
Okay. Last question to you, John. Do you have any specific practice that you do to access your soul and beyond as part of this awakening process, or any suggestions for people who are listening to you?
Yeah, I've learned to tune in my practice to my heart, through my body, through my crown, through my consciousness, to the felt sense of my own soul, and to be able to stay there, and to open and to let more of that pour in and remember itself through this body mind. And I think that's absolutely possible for all of us. And the thing that opens the door to any of these deeper layers of who we are, in my experience, is sincerity. It's a real, sincere, vulnerable willingness to make ourselves available to open, and we call them in, and then we're sincere enough and we mean it enough that we stay there. We don't just start looking at our phone after 30 seconds or whatever. It's like we stay there and really make ourselves available. And when we do that, and we stay there, these things come.
Okay, thank you very much, John. So this was Jon Eden Khan sharing his perspectives, insights into the Trans Himalayan teachings, and also into the human evolution as a collective being. So looking forward, John, for another conversation, maybe in the coming months, further deep diving into what you called Shambhala impact. Curious about that. Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure, Chaka. Thank you.
Thank you.